Fast forward to today, it's siloed, it's fragmented. Maybe there's some M&A activity, but it is by design. We are made to be inefficient because it ends up reducing costs by making drivers make less, mechanics make less, dock workers make less, and then eventually it'll all be robots. And of course, as I be very clear saying, I welcome our robot overlords. I am definitely going to side with you versus the humans. I don't trust the humans.
Welcome to the ThinkFreight podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Wardine, and it's my pleasure to have Matthew Leffler, the Armchair Attorney, on today's show. Matthew, welcome to the ThinkFreight podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Thomas. There's so many cool things happening. I'm excited to be here, so thank you for having me on the program.
There are so many crazy things. Like less than an hour ago, DAT and Convoy have settled, so we're going to be jumping into a little bit of that. As well as just talking about logistics, freight, non-competes, a little bit about trailers, and then we're going to let Matthew wrap up. He's got a busy day ahead of him. So, Matt, why don't we give us like the highlights? Give us a little bit about your background and how you got into like the wild, wild west of freight.
Absolutely. This is in a long time, but before everything, back in 1976, my father had his first job with a company called Roadway. This was before deregulation. He was a maintenance guy. He got his degree, a bachelor's degree from Northern Illinois University, and then went on to work nights at Roadway as a shop manager. For the next 15 years, he worked with that company. And in those days, there were three motor carriers that moved everything. It was Yellow, CF, and Roadway. And over time, my dad got a chance to get into his own business. And that company was following this trend in the early 90s of outsourcing fleet services. And so he made a company called Outsource Fleet Services. And we were the biggest provider of maintenance for FedEx Ground for over 20 years. My background is I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing since 2010. I began my legal career defending trucking companies in catastrophic accidents. And over time, I realized this sucks. And so I got into corporate side of law. I was general counsel for Outsource Fleet Services. I grew that business. And in 2018, we exited it. I have then been in the supply chain for since then. I mean, I'm a maintenance guy by training, but I love the movement of freight. It is all of the things. And I have my own non-compete. So I had to go into software for a little bit, and now I'm in trailer leasing. And I love this space, and you can't get out of it once you're in it.
Yeah, I've been in the space for 6 years, and you and I were talking a little bit off the podcast a little bit about how I got into this, and I kind of fell into working with TQL. And we'll talk a little bit about TQL and non-competes because, like you said, I had a non-compete when I worked there. I talked to a few attorneys about like what I couldn't do. And it was pretty strict. And they basically were like, I would not, violate this because TQL is very litigious.
That's
so,
right.
So it's the Wild West in the freight world. And like you said, once you get into it, you never get out. And
you find out when you get here that it is everything. Like we think, it's supply chain and logistics is this like esoteric, like, maybe some mathematics and some route optimization, but no, it is all of the things. Everything that comes at your door or at your shelf at the store, it came on a truck and probably on a trailer. So everything is logistics.
It is. And, I fell into this and I never, when I got into freight brokerage, I had no idea, even what I was supposed to do. It sounded cool and I needed a job. I was like 22 or 23 and I was like, I need a job. This sounds interesting. They're going to pay me how much? Okay, cool. So I fell into it and I was like, I got into the first 6 months where I was training and had my broker training me and I'm learning his book of business. And I absolutely loved it. I just, for some reason, it just it clicked, everything that so I commuted back and forth from Indiana to Chicago. So it was 70 miles a day. Yeah, 70 miles one way. So I was doing 150 miles. I was seeing trucks everywhere. And I just had these wheels turning in my head because I'm like, okay, now I actually understand what these guys are doing on the road, right? I just never, as a 20-year-old, 22-year-old, you don't really think about how things get to the shelves. You don't think I'm going to go to Walmart and they're not going to have chicken breasts. No, Walmart just magically appear.
This is what I love about what Amazon did. So Amazon came to us years ago and said, we're going to start bringing you books to your door. And people were like, that's weird, but that's interesting. But what they've put together over the last, decade or 2 decades is they've shown us that the supply chain and the product that you get are the same experience. And so
They
people
are.
now realize, wait a second, the things that I need has this massive tail that follows it. All of the places it's been, all the stops it's had. Has it been on a boat? Maybe. Has it been on an airplane? Maybe. How about a train? Could have been a truck.
Possible.
Absolutely. It's
Yep.
incredible. It's an incredible space. And I'm so glad to see people like you getting in this business and talking about it, because there are so many careers in supply chain that are so much beyond driving a truck or brokering freight.
Right.
It is anything you can imagine.
It is. And I, even when I got into it, even when I was a couple years deep, I still didn't realize how many different paths that you could take in supply chain. You can, I mean, like you said, it's everything. So anything you want to do, if you want to be a forklift driver, amazing. If you want to go set sail and be on the boat and be a maritime person, that's amazing. You can go do that. There are so many different options for you to just go and live the life you want and, help move freight and make, when I got into this, it felt like I was making a difference. And I think that that's kind of what we all look for, right? Is that passion and that drive to help us feel like we're making a difference and helping, drive a little bit of change.
There is nothing more challenging than safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. This is a Herculean effort. And even to this day, in this world, it is one of the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the United States is driving a commercial vehicle. And yet, in all 50 states, for high school educated men, it is the most common job that people have. So we need to celebrate truckers, because at the end of the day, we need them more than they need us.
That's very true, because without them, I mean, they are honestly the backbone of this world and this economy. So we couldn't do anything without them. So Matt, let's talk a little bit. We'll switch gears a little bit and hop into like Armchair Attorney. What is the Armchair Attorney? How did that start?
Oh, it's a fun story. It's a plucky lawyer who wanted to make a consulting firm. And I said, what people need is consultants. They need like lawyers who can give them advice, not just legal advice, but business advice. And I made I first found the domain armchairattorney.com. No one owned it. So I bought it. And then
I buy a lot of domains.
I do. I buy too many domains. I love it. I love it's just so much fun. So I buy the domain. I make an LLC. My wife and I are co-owners of the LLC.
Okay.
And we were going to do some consulting work. And everybody who came to me said, "Hey, Matt, you're such a smart guy in supply chain. Can you look at my non-compete?" I'm like, wait, I'm not doing legal work. I'm doing consulting work. And that was what the clients really wanted, was the legal services. So I had to make a decision. This is an important decision in my life. Do I start a new LLC and pay $250, or do I pay $50 and kick my wife out of the LLC? And I'm frugal. So I kicked her out, and Armchair Attorney became a law firm. So I've been practicing as the Armchair Attorney for about 2 years, and my clients are almost always in the supply chain. And it's generally things around these contracts, these post-employment restrictive covenants, non-competes, non-solicits, non-disparagements, non-disclosures, all of the things that we want you not to do after you leave us. And that's the practice that I've been doing. And I took that pathway and created a podcast so I could talk about the issues that I'm passionate about and bring on people to say, hey, let's talk about whatever is interesting that's happening, kind of like what you're doing. So I love the desire to make content. There's interesting conversations to be had. So that is like a little bit about the Armchair Attorney. I have a trademark. It's Armchair Attorney. Awesome. Yeah, I have a great trademark attorney. The thing is, don't do your own legal work. You hire experts to do that. So I have a great trademark attorney. She's been very helpful for me. $1,000, and a year later, I have a piece of paper that says I own it.
Hey, that piece of paper is very important.
Absolutely. It's not framed yet. I want to frame with the rest of the stuff, but I'll get there eventually.
You got to get that framed. That's important, because the Armchair Attorney, that is everything.
I love the alliteration. That's the thing. I mean, people are like, "Oh, are you a real lawyer?" Yeah, I'm comfortable. I work from home. It's a comfortable law firm.
When I first heard about you, it honestly took me a little bit to realize you actually were a real attorney. Like, so like on Twitter, you hear so many people like shit post. Like I'm still in a lot of like basketball space. I'm a big basketball nerd. So like you hear a lot of people say like, I'm an armchair GM or I'm an armchair this. And so I was like, okay, this guy just knows he loves law. But no, like after like a month, I was like, oh, this guy's actually an attorney. Like this is actually like he's just shit posting his own law firm, and I love it. Like it's literally just like a meme law firm, and it's amazing. Like it's
Oh yeah.
perfect.
I use the podcast to bring in clients, and I got to a place where I don't take new clients anymore. I don't. I have a very small group of people. I'll do small projects here and there, but generally speaking, it is not something that's open to the public. I have a very small group, but I have all the things, all the documents that say there, and I still have the debt. Like that's important too. Like the government's very, very careful to make sure. Are you still a lawyer? Because you got to pay us.
You still owe us some money, man. Make sure you're still a lawyer.
Collections, it's good stuff.
No, that's really awesome, man. I really love that, and kind of like sticking to that. So jumping back to non-competes. Yeah. So you said you had a lot of people reaching out and asking you to like, hey, can you look at my non-compete? So for some of the people who might not know out there, what is a non-compete and a non-solicit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these are contracts, and I used that phrase before of a post-employment restrictive covenant. I will break those down. Yeah. Post-employment means you are no longer at the company. Restrictive. Okay. We take your liberty. You've given the company something. And a covenant is just another word of a contract. So what typically happens is you as a young employee or you as a potential employee are presented with a document. And the document will be usually a non-disclosure, or it'll have other phrases in there. But inside the document will have these things. The non-compete is essentially a few different factors. And what they boil down to is it is a prohibition to do a certain type of business in a certain geographic area for a period of time. And the question is always, is it a reasonable non-compete? What is the actual business you're not allowed to do? How long is it going to last? And what is the geographic scope? So I'll give the example of Subway. I use TQL and a lot of other examples when I teach people, but I'll talk about Subway. Subway says, look, we have a problem. Our people keep quitting, and this is hard to replace them. And then they go work for Subway, and we hate this. So how can we as Jimmy John's? So Jimmy John's is a great sandwich company. They make a plan. They say, we're going to have every single one of our people sign a non-competition agreement. And in Jimmy John's non-competition agreement, it goes for 2 years. And it prohibits you from working at any sandwich company within about 3 miles of a Jimmy John's if that company is getting over 10% of their revenue from cold sandwiches. Now, Thomas, you might say, that sounds really stupid. That sounds awful. And it is. But most people who sign non-competes, about 30 to 40% of them make under $13 an hour. They don't know what they've signed. And if they get a cease and desist letter from corporate Jimmy John's, they're not going to take the new job. So that's what non-competes are. The story of non-competes began after the Civil War. After the Civil War, people that were former slaves were trying to find new ways to make money. And they were still paid very little. But one of the tactics that they used was say, hey, here's what you're going to do. You work in our place. We'll pay you now, and we have to pay you. But here's a non-compete. You can't go work at any other place in the area. So you could trap people. So the whole idea of a non-compete is to say, I don't know how to retain you. I have no idea, but I don't want you to go work for my competitor. And it's like dating somebody. If you date someone, they say, look, we got to break up, but I don't want you to see anybody else like me. That's a non-compete. And in some states, you have to pay separate money to make it enforceable. Some states you have to give, like in Illinois, my state, you have to give someone 14 days to review the document. And if they don't get 14 days and are told to find an attorney, automatically unenforceable, knocked out. But this is the nature of it. So the non-compete is what you are not allowed to do. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. So I want to touch on something you just said. You said, you're in the state of Illinois. When did that law stating that when a non-compete, is to be signed or business is going to try to enforce one, when did that become a law that they had to give you 14 days?
This has been on for a while. So let me kind of back up a little bit and talk about non-competes as a bigger scope of things.
Please.
Over 30 million working Americans, 1 in 5, are bound by a non-competition agreement. The Federal Trade Commission has estimated that if we didn't have non-competes, American workers would be making $300 billion. That's billion with a B. More money every single year because of non-competes. So non-competes are not just a supply chain thing. They're a doctor thing. They're an anesthesiologist thing. They're a janitor thing. That's an everybody thing. So every state has been watching this. The example I'll use is the Trunk Club. Have you ever heard of Trunk Club?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, a great little company in Chicago. I think they got bought
Yep.
out by somebody, but they had this idea. They said, we're going to design you the perfect outfit. Give us your measurements and we'll ship you clothes. They made all their designers sign non-competition agreements. So if you went to go work for another place that picks outfits for people, you couldn't do it. The attorney generals all across the country are like, what the heck is going on? So every state has been making their own rules. So Illinois, for like 5 or 10 years, has been having these rules about the 14-day period or certain economic thresholds. If you make under a certain amount of money, you can't even have a non-compete. States like California ban them outright. So every state has a different way of doing non-competes. That's why when you talk about someone like TQL, they make the contract governed by Ohio law, even if you live in Indiana or live in Colorado, because in Ohio and Ohio law, they love non-competition agreements. They love them. So that's kind of the background, at least with Illinois.
No, that makes sense. So, we were chatting a little bit before, earlier in the show, that I had been at TQL and I had to sign a non-compete. And this came pretty quickly. So like they onboard you, you go through like all of the normal steps. You meet like your class. My class was like 22 people. You start doing all of your training. You spend basically a full day of training. And at like 3:30, they're basically like, here's this piece of paper. This is the rest of your onboarding. We didn't have it ready for you this morning. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
And what's weird is like, I witnessed this over and over again where they would say those things, but every single class would receive these at 3:30. So it was a scheduled, mission of sorts to say, hey, we're going to give these out at 3:30 after, the first or second day. And they were basically like, this is the rest of your onboarding was with a bunch of other paperwork. It's, one of the last pages are mixed in there. And I mean, at 22, I had no idea what a non-compete was. I'm going through just kind of looking at this and I'm like, this, what the heck is this? So I didn't have much time. They basically were like, you have to sign it or we're escorting you out of the premises.
Yep.
And
right.
I was like, so I have to sign. Basically, like I started to read it and I was like, so I went to my boss and I was like, hey, like this paperwork says I can't work in logistics for a year. And he's like, oh yeah, that's typical in logistics, blah, blah, blah. So I ended up signing it. Obviously I was at TQL for 2.5 years. And I, as I started to learn about the industry and learning more, like this is not such a common practice. It wasn't, it was one of those situations where I was like, damn, like, what do I do? Like, I love this industry. I love this business, but I don't want to be bound by something like this. So, ultimately my girlfriend and I decided we're moving to Texas.
There you go.
So I left TQL in Chicago. I waited out my non-compete and I got back into the industry. And it's one of those things where I'm so anti non-compete now, where I'm just like, I'm trying to fight that fight of like, don't sign these non-competes. They're not, it's not worth it.
I have heard this story and your experience dozens and dozens of times. And I want to just for your listeners to just kind of think about this. When you are trying to get a new job or starting a new job, it is a terrifying experience.
Yes,
the goal that you have is to make sure that you are able to perform the work that you want to do, please your superiors, and make an impact. You're excited about it. When you're presented with this document and you're not given time to review, and they tell you it's just a formality, this is the scam that these employers do, because they know very well what their rights are. And I'll use the example of TQL in Ohio, for example. They have a non-compete that is not legal. It is not legally enforceable. But in most states, we allow a thing called blue penciling. And blue penciling, all that means is the judge can say, well, you put it in here that he couldn't do this, but that's a little expansive. Let's modify and make it smaller. Now, that's at your cost and TQL's cost, but they would rather make a contract that's illegal and have it modified by a court than just proactively do it right. If I don't know how, like, we have to look at timelines for when you went to TQL and how they present that document to you. I suspect that in the document, it says you must have 14 days to review this. You must consult with a lawyer. And they just say, don't worry about it. Just sign it. Just sign the document. That's all you got to do.
It does.
Yeah. Comply with what the law says, but don't actually do it in practice. It's baloney.
When I left, the first day I left, I immediately requested my non-compete. And it took me about 3.5 weeks for them to actually get it to me.
That's right.
It was like a daily email, phone call chase to get it. But yeah, it did state that.
This is the thing about like no slander or nothing bad about young people coming to this business, but I am trained to trick you. I am trained to put a box around you and you have no idea what it's going to do. You have no idea or the intentions I have behind it. Because all that we do in this business, like if I'm representing a company with a non-compete, I'm trying to enforce it. I will make it so that you are unhirable. I will litigate you to a place where you can't even pay your rent. Like if you look at the FTC's comments, so let's back up a little bit. The Federal Trade Commission has made a proposed rule banning non-competition agreements. That proposed rule had over 20,000 people comment. Just to give you an idea, like average comments on a proposed rule are not 20,000. So people are really, really, really motivated. It's bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats, we both hate being locked into contracts. So
you can't get Republicans and Democrats to get to agree on anything. So
absolutely.
So when you can get them to agree on this, I mean, you know that it's something pretty bad.
And this is for so many young people. I mean, there's plenty of reasons to hate supply chain. Like, let me be very clear. This is a nightmare of a dumpster fire, and it's been burning for 100 years. That's okay. These other things aren't necessary to keep us in this place. If they could make drivers sign non-competes, they do it. They can't, but they try. So this is the world we live in. It's designed to break young people on the machinery, and it's just more meat for the grinder.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's just a tool for the corporate overlords to, really just hone in and say, hey, sorry.
There's a very common practice. A private equity firm comes in, buys a company, pushes non-competes to every single person. This is the nature of this business. And if we can stop them, I mean, we'll talk about non-solicits just briefly, but a non-solicit, what that contract does is it says for a time period, you, the former employee, cannot poach your former coworkers or potentially contractors, and you're not going to poach customers. That stops you from reaching out. Those entities can come to you. So if you have a non-solicit and you're like, I want to keep doing what I do, you can do that. Just don't call them. If you reach out yourself to them, look, I'll get your social media records. I'll get your cell phone. I'll get all the records you have. I'll find out if you reached out. Like, we can do it. So if you are in that position, always get a lawyer, but don't solicit. Just make general posts like, I'm back in the business. I'd like to work with somebody. They'll figure it out.
Yep. Yeah, no, and for sure. I mean, definitely don't want to get into that trap of not having a non-compete, but going to a new brokerage, starting your own brokerage, and then going out and trying to solicit your customers.
Yeah, call the old shippers back. Yeah, I got my new thing. Yeah, the shipper's going to get sued and you're going to get sued.
Yeah, so definitely don't want to go down that path. But like you said, if you're just posting about it and saying, hey, I'm back, and they happen to reach out to you, or they happen to see that or hear it word of mouth, there's nothing really wrong in that situation because they reached out to you.
Yeah. And I'm like, what I help my clients with on non-solicit specifically is how to circumvent them. Like, that's one of the things I do. It's like, I know how the buttons and the lines, I know how to do it. So like, that's some of the value that a lawyer can bring you. But yeah, in the non-competes, it's just disheartening. And there are so many, even like motor carriers, like for-hire motor carriers, they're making everyone sign non-competes. It is everywhere in every business.
That's wild. That really is wild. We'll switch gears a little bit, Matt. So DAT versus Convoy.
Yes.
They just settled.
This is breaking news right now, today.
Breaking news. And what sucks is this is going to go live next week. So you guys are going to find out all about this next week. Um, but
Well, I'll
of
give you
course,
more
like,
details than anyone else can. Like I've been following this case from the very, very beginning. It's very
well, then
interesting.
it's perfect that we've got you on. So what? So in this case, so what was happening? What started the legal proceedings of DAT and
Yeah,
Convoy?
this is a fascinating case. So we know Convoy, digital freight
Yeah.
brokerage out of Seattle. We know DAT, dial a truck. Everyone loves dial a truck. Well, the folks at Convoy realized they needed access to more capacity, and they were going to get the capacity from DAT. So DAT makes them sign a contract, and DAT's contract is really interesting. It's $52,500 a month for access to DAT. But if Convoy agrees to have DAT as their exclusive provider, it's $5,000 off. Sounds good. But
Yeah.
DAT has a little caveat in their contract. They have a non competition agreement. And what they say is Convoy, you can use our stuff, but don't make a competing load board. If you make a competing load board, you are in breach of our contract. And Convoy says, okay, because these are very sophisticated entities with a
Yeah.
lot of money, like
Yeah.
a lot of money, and they make the path. As time goes on, Convoy says we need more than dial a truck. We need to get another load board. So their fee went from $47,500 to $52,500, the original price the contract was going to have.
Right.
But then DAT hears a thing called Convoy for Brokers. And DAT goes, wait, like that record scratch noise, like, wait a second. Yeah, we don't mind you paying us boatloads of money a month, but what the heck is Convoy for Brokers? And DAT determines from their own lawyers that it is a competing load board, that Convoy has violated the contract, and DAT sues immediately in federal court in Oregon. So they sue in federal court, and Convoy comes back and says, that was unfair. DAT was so mean to us. They forced us. They're like a monopoly. And then Convoy modifies and creates another lawsuit against DAT. And Convoy says, look, DAT, you got 60% of the market share of this load board business. You are a monopoly. You are violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. And they begin their litigation. So DAT has more claims they throw at Convoy, those get thrown away. And what remains is the breach of contract claim. Convoy is being sued by DAT for breaching that non-competition agreement. And then you have the Convoy folks suing DAT for antitrust. Right. And this has been what's been going on since last year. But this year, 2023, very little is done. No one sees much traction. So there's a website called Pacer. It's where all the federal documents for lawsuits go. And I go on there and look at it and say, what's going on? And clearly they were negotiating. So what happened for DAT is that they don't like when people make competing products, but honestly, you can make a load board in like a couple of months. Like it took Convoy a year to do it. Exactly. So they made their process. They have their thing, and they want Convoy to be destroyed. They want all of Convoy for Brokers to go away. That was their ask, and the courts is not going to give them that. It's not going to happen. So as of today, this is July 18th of 2023. What happens in this moment is the case is dismissed with prejudice, which means both parties have come to an agreement, and they will never sue on these facts again. They might sue on a settlement agreement that gets breached. We will likely not see that, but they will likely release some public information as to what agreement they came to. But that is the crust, the real like meat and potatoes of the Convoy v. DAT. It's a breach of contract on one side, and it's you're a monopoly on the other.
No, it's been extremely interesting to like follow this story because it's, coming from the brokerage world, it's very interesting to watch, these two behemoths of companies like go at each other for something like a load board. Like, right. It's
absolutely
such obviously it's a very big part of DAT's business, but it seems like to me, obviously, they just obviously didn't want the competition, and they said, Convoy. They said, Convoy. No. And what do you think Has there been, obviously there probably hasn't been, I think you actually already mentioned this. There hasn't been any real release as to what the details were as to the settlement agreement, but I'm sure we will hear more of that information in the future, and can kind of see where, where things end up.
These two companies are naturally frenemies, right? So
Right.
DAT is the old dial-a-truck at the travel centers when you go and try to find a backhaul. Like it's listed on a board.
Yeah.
Like that's what they are. Now they've done a
Yeah.
whole bunch of other stuff over the last few decades, but that's the core business. And Convoy's
Yeah.
like, what if we could what if we could tap into every driver's cell phone? Like fundamentally, that was like the ownership, the innovators behind Convoy.
Yeah.
Like if we could just like touch the driver with the cell phone and know exactly where they are, we could take that information and pump that to any number of places. It would be interesting. So for Convoy, they're like, we need more drivers to use our app. And the way they can do that is by making a partnership with DAT. These two businesses will find a way to work together. And in this market, like partnerships are probably much more useful than litigation. Litigation is generally not the way to resolve difficult disputes.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, like they're frenemies, right? There's a lot of frenemies in this business. Like
we're all frenemies, honestly.
Yeah, we're all frenemies. That's the truth. I mean, it's just, it's just how it's kind of like the old adage, like you have to keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
That's right.
It's, in this business, it's just the nature of it. Like everyone's trying to advance, because this industry is very far behind a lot of other industries. It's been very hard to get not just the trucking side, but also the automation side of things, for things like, what you used to do in the tech side of just automating a lot of the maintenance, automating things like that, so that you don't have to think about that. And this industry is so far behind that. So it's just the nature of it, becoming frenemies in the space.
It's by design, honestly. I mean, if you look back in the Wayback Machine, like 1980, before deregulation, average truck driver was making $38,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, it's like 120. They were doing well. 60% of them were unionized, right? Like fast forward to today, it's siloed, it's fragmented. Maybe there's some M&A activity, but it is by design. We are made to be inefficient because it ends up reducing costs by making drivers make less, mechanics make less, dock workers make less, and then eventually it'll all be robots. And of course, as I'd be very clear of saying, I welcome our robot overlords. I am definitely going to side with you versus the humans. I don't trust the humans.
Me either. I have, interesting question, and I actually want to segue into something else after this. As an attorney, have you seen some of the new like Chat GPT style or AI style attorneys that are like going to court to fight things like traffic tickets? What do you think about things like that?
I love it. So lawyers are special animals. We're very special. We protect ourselves. So I'll give you an example with non-competition agreements. They apply to everybody but us. You cannot lock a lawyer in a non-competition agreement. Legally, ethically, we can't do it. Now, if you are dumb enough to sign one as a lawyer, you're going to have some problems. But like generally speaking, you don't have to deal with them. So the automation of doing what lawyers do is a natural progression. The ChatGPT has passed law school exams. It has passed the bar exam. It can do these things. And when it first came out, many lawyers that I know were using it to draft up demand letters or to draft up documents or whatever. Wow. And it's cool. The problem is lawyers are like, wait a second, that machine looks like it's unauthorized practice of law. So if you go to ChatGPT today and try to ask legal things, it'll say, it looks like you're looking for legal advice. You should contact a local bar association. Like it starts funneling you away from the platform. Yeah. Because if anyone can destroy artificial intelligence, it's these stupid lawyers who don't want to lose the billable hours because we need those hours. So I'm fascinated by it. There are so many things. What I would say is most interesting on the whole automation and the intelligence stuff is it came for the creatives first. Like we didn't think it was going to make artwork, but I have some great artwork that Dolly made for me with my dog looking into her water bowl, and it's like a universe inside of it. It's incredible. So we start with the creatives, and then it's like, okay, what else can we automate? Everything, like truck drivers.
Everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, everything can be automated, and it's very interesting to see kind of where this path of not just like chat GPT and AI, but like the whole future of like autonomous driving. And,
Yeah.
when when I was at another company, I was talking with an executive from a company that was doing autonomous highways. And they're starting to, in like Michigan and a couple other states, build out either, I believe it's either alongside or incongruent with the current highway, like I-94,
Yeah.
where they're going to be building stretches, like 20-mile stretches, where it's just going to be autonomous highway. And you're just going to have in that stretch all autonomous trucks to start like trying that phase of, can we build these highways to have safe, vehicle drivers, but also find a way to have those autonomous driverless vehicles so that we can, start that push away from, having so many truck drivers in the truck. Obviously, not something that like I think we're ever going to see, probably not in the next 50 years. It's so that technology I think is
Oh,
so far away.
I'm
But
going to
what do
push
you
back.
think?
I
Yeah.
am a big believer of this thing called ACEs. ACEs is
Hmm.
autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. One of the
Yeah.
greatest innovations in supply chain was the advent of the independent contractor, the ability to say, you're going to perform exactly the way I want you to, but I'm not going to pay you health insurance. I'm not going to pay you
Right.
overtime. I'm not going to pay you anything. You're just going to go do you're a
You just
business
have to
owner.
do it.
Just go do it.
Yeah.
And you look at automation for motor carriers for driving over the road. And right now, the FMCSA has put out, this is going to be a silly, long legal term, so I apologize in advance, but they put out a supplemental advanced notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay.
FMCSA is saying, hey guys and gals, we're thinking about level 4 and level 5 automation. Level 4 automation means driver is not there, not in the cab, but they're remote and they control it.
Remote. Yeah.
Level 5 is there's someone remote there to assist, but they're not operating it. And if the FMCSA puts out those rules and it becomes finalized, the speed with which we see adoption will be manifestly different than we're used to thinking about. Because if you can prove
Interesting.
the safety of the technology, the legality of the technology, and if you can show a motor carrier you're going to save money on drivers, I mean, we are right now, in this we're talking, Yellow might go bankrupt,
Right.
22,000 unionized drivers. UPS is talking about striking August 1st. So
Yep.
we as people in the business know it's not a question of if, it's a
If.
question of when. And if it's a question of when, what are the barriers? Cost, infrastructure, and legality. So in my opinion, you see people like Outrider that is making autonomous
Yeah.
spotting trucks. You have Kodiak, which is a autonomous truck manufacturer with bridge investing by the Department of Defense, with Pilot Flying J. Like these
Yeah.
companies see the future, not because they're super innovative, but they say, what's the biggest cost in transportation? Fuel and labor. Oh, we can electrify it or change the fuel. That's cool. And then the driver, you mean he's not going to complain? Yeah. Where do I sign up? What I will say is that the big caution for me for all of this is if you look at the International Road Check, so the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance
Yeah.
does this thing called International Road Check. It's a 3-day long inspection blitz. When it happens, 1 in 5 commercial vehicles fail the minimum safety standards to operate on our highways. 20%. So if we
That's
think
scary.
it should scare everybody. It should scare all of us. We think, oh, the truck is like an airplane. Like, no, it's not. Like,
No.
they're not doing
Nothing
it.
close.
Like, oh, the drivers pre and post trip? Do they? Do they really? Yeah, you're shaking. Yeah, of course they don't. But some of them do.
Yeah.
Great drivers out there. Great
Yeah.
drivers.
I know
But
a lot of great drivers that do, but I also know plenty of drivers that are like pre and post. What's that?
yeah, I don't do that. That's what mechanics do. But that's reality. So if we do see some pathway of getting more rigorous inspections and better maintained vehicles, I'm for that. So
Yeah.
if we see automation coming, and it is coming, it will be very interesting to see how it happens. I don't think it's 50 years away. I say in 5 or 10 years, our supply web will be manifestly different than it is today.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think we'll to say 50 years for us to really start seeing it. I think 50 years to where the whole supply chain is automated and autonomous.
Yeah.
I think maybe 10 years to where we really start to see a real heavy like autonomous driving component on the road, whether that's, you know, just regional trucks go, like we have a lot of that now. We have, you know, from parts of California to Vegas, they're doing autonomous trips.
Yeah,
In Colorado,
right.
they're doing some.
They got
So
platooning,
it's
the middle mile. That's the
exactly.
really great spot for that kind of innovation.
And I don't know if we'll see a lot of the long haul, you know, cross stuff that has to go from California to Boston. I don't know. I mean, obviously, if you can make that trip 24/7 instead of having one driver have to stop or a team to, you know, obviously there's variables there, but
Yeah.
it's a lot tougher to say, hey, can this truck, do we have that infrastructure in 10 years
Yeah,
to
that's right.
to say, you know, these can make it from California to Boston?
Yeah,
Because
they'll make those
go
nodes.
ahead.
They'll make nodes where you can drop off the
Yeah.
highway. So like a travel center or a parking facility, robot comes in, drops it off. The next robot grabs it and goes to the next destination. And those robots are just doing a single leg of that path. And the
So
goal
it'll
would
become
hopefully
more,
be less
go ahead.
cost for consumers, but
Yep.
in reality, it'd be more value for shareholders. That's probably the outcome we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have a lot more hubs. It'll be treated a lot more like that, like traditional LTL is now, right? It'll be more, you have hubs all across the US, and then they'll go from one autonomous hub to the next autonomous hub, and another truck will take it. And I think we're probably from that really taking hold 10 or 15 years, because like we were talking about earlier, we really can't get, you know, Democrats and Republicans to agree on anything. So I think, like, to say that Congress and to say that both houses are going to put that money towards this, at least right now, I just don't see happening. But
Yeah.
if, you know, if obviously if they're if the people giving them donations are saying, hey, let's make this happen, they'll make it happen. So
yeah, I'm with you.
yeah.
I
So-
apologize. We talked before we went on camera. I have twins now. So I have a 10-year-old son, a 7-year-old son, and I have twins that are 8 months. And I can
Man,
hear
you are
my
busy.
daughter just singing so peaceful in the background. So I apologize for any viewers or
No,
listeners that hear the squawking in the background.
No, listen, our listeners, they'll be okay with the squawking. I think it's a really good conversation with us.
That's right.
But touching on something you said just a minute ago on regulations, you know, kind of pivoting a little bit to like double brokers and fraud.
Yeah.
You know, kind of earlier this year, I saw Truck Stop had said complaints of double brokering and fraud had jumped somewhere like 400% in Q4 of 22. So do you think, you know, on a regulatory front, it's the threshold to start a new trucking company or a freight brokerage? Is it too low? Is it too easy to do those things?
I don't like a lot of regulation to start a company. Like, I think that the barriers to become a business owner ought not to be super challenging. So that the phenomenon of double brokers and fraud, it's not a new thing, right? It's not new,
Right.
but when the markets start going south and things start getting a little wonky, the opportunity
The
for
scams.
exactly, they start going faster. And the other challenge is, you know, you make barriers higher, the good actors get punished too, and we don't really want to punish the good actors. And then the part that I go back to, so the FMCSA, like what do they exist for? They exist for safety. Like that's their thing. Like, they want people to be safe. If a double broker is moving things and there's not a big bunch of safety problems, they're probably not going to be like, we really need to focus on this. The constituents, like in our industry, we're like, we should focus on this. And they're like, well, hey guys, like 1 in 5 of the vehicles fail inspection. Can't we just focus on that? And they're like, no, that costs money. Fix the brokers. Okay. But the problem with the double broker business is it's not happening in the United States. I mean, it is, but these people are different countries, different places. The enforcement mechanisms are very, very small. We don't have a massive workforce of federal workers who are doing audits of brokerages and confirming that they're, you know, legitimate or not. So the question is like, does the cure, is it worth whatever we have to spend to make it? And I'm not sold on this. So for double brokering, for me, I know it's a problem, but there are technologies that seemingly help that problem. And maybe that's the solution, as opposed to the government coming in and saying, we need to have higher bonds. We need to have more, you know, different types of in-person interviews with every potential brokerage owner. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Something I saw that just kind of baffled me was some of the registration. So you can obviously contest whether someone can get their authorities or not.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see a lot of these brokers or carriers that were starting were using, like, there was like 10 or 15 in a row that would use all the exact same credentials, where it would be the exact same address, exact same email for all 20 of these companies. And I think that's where you start to see a lot of problems, or a lot of brokers start to talk about it more, because it's like, okay, if all of these are getting approved, like, what is the FMCSA doing? Are they not even checking that against another database to say, is this email active? Is this actually a real company? And that's kind of, I think, where it gets into it. But like you said, there's really not that workforce. I think the FMCSA has around like 1,100 employees. So to say that they're going to be the ones that are responsible for safety, and then also approving carriers, approving brokers, having to go in and audit them, it's just not going to happen. They would probably need somewhere like 10,000 employees to be able to go through and do that. And you're just not going to see that. I don't think you're going to see that kind of commitment to say, hey, let's take our workforce, 900% and grow to tackle double brokers, something that doesn't, one, make us money, and two, it's not going to really, I personally don't think that the government stepping in is going to have that big of an impact, because, yeah, you may stop them from registering, but again, like some things that have been going on recently, like you said, this marketplace, and it's not just in freight and logistics, it's all across the world in the country, where when the economy is the way it is, fraud and scams are always on the rise.
And to your point on that, like the way to fix it, like, now there is obviously some technology, maybe some regulation, but also just doing your own due diligence, like making the phone calls.
Absolutely.
Like, our generation, you're probably younger than I am, but like, we don't want to talk to human beings. Like, the whole point of being in this new technology world is I don't have to talk to people. But if you don't talk to them, you have no idea who you're doing business with. Like, my father's company, we were in business for 25 years. Like, we knew who our customers were, because it was very important that they paid us for the things that we did. And it's just, this is the nature of it, man.
No, it is. And, I was a broker. So when I brokered, I was very relationship driven. I was very hesitant to like use new carriers, because when I first started, this was still a problem. Like, it's nothing new that just popped up overnight. It's just the bad actors saw a hole in the system, and they exploited that hole in the system for as long as they could. And obviously it's still effective, but what they're doing is not nearly as effective now, because we've caught on to their games. But now there's new attempts where they're sending, and this has always been a thing, but they're sending out fraudulent emails saying, hey, you've got a bad review, and then it leads you to a bogus phishing website. So they just steal your credentials that way. Right. So that way it looks like they're a legitimate carrier, and they're in a week, they're not going to even remember what your MC number was, because they're going to scam $100,000, $200,000 from other carriers. And
one of the things, like, one of the ways I see people solving this problem these days is like, the ELD mandate. Now every motor carrier has to have an electronic device in their vehicle. And there are ways to tap into that and verify who they are based on the fact that they have the ELD. So I feel like why we as an industry are mad and frustrated and want to see change, I don't think we need to make any hasty decisions, because like the last thing you want is whatever new problem the government makes for you, because like the solution is going to cost something, and that something is something we don't know yet. So I prefer the devil that I know versus the devil that I haven't met yet. But again, I like, this is change. This is the industry. It's Dave here for a moment, and you'll see everything is different the next day.
Exactly. No, exactly. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that insight. Switching gears, a little bit, we're kind of wrapping up here. So trailers, you started recently with Contract Leasing Corp, CLC. Right. How's that been? How's the trailer business been?
I love commercial trailers, and CLC is a phenomenal company. We've been in business since 1991. We operate 17,000 trailers. Of that 17,000,
CLC is older than I am. I'm 30. I was born.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, this is why people think about trailers, right? So there are 5 million trailers in the United States, and trailers, in my mind, are like the blood cells that bring everything everywhere. We really care about drivers and powered assets, but what is really at stake is what's inside the box. And so over the last few years, we as an industry have seen new people making new attempts to make trailers more interesting. We have companies like Repower that do trailer sharing. You see people like Convoy making Convoy Go, or Uber's Power Loop. The smartest companies in the world are trailer companies. One of the biggest leasing companies out there is Extra Lease, owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire also owns BNSF and Pilot Flying J. Like, you start to see how the machinations of the world move, and they move with trailers. So with CLC, my role is the vice president of sales and marketing. I get to talk to people like you about trailers. And that's the greatest thing in the world, because I love those boxes. Doesn't matter who the manufacturer is. There's a lot of great manufacturers out there, but it's, at the end of the day, that's how you move everything. And that's why I love trailers.
They are really cool. So I come from, obviously, my adult background is all about brokerage for the most part. But growing up, my grandparents had a petroleum business, so I was always around trucking and supply chain. And I didn't realize my love for this until I got into brokerage. But I spent a lot of my time around the petroleum industry. So it was a lot of box truck stuff. So they were moving a lot of drums and a lot of just like pallets of like DEF and things like that.
Absolutely.
So I got very fascinated at a very young age, because my grandfather, he owned, and my grandparents owned and operated it, and they would, in the summertime, I had nothing to do. So it was, my parents worked, so it was go to work with my grandparents, and they were always like, I'd walk around with them and learn about the business, and always be like going up into the trucks and just like learning. So it was super cool to like, be in that part of it. And then, now my love for the whole industry, trailers is there too. It's such a fascinating, like you said, they're required to move everything. Like, driver aside, we absolutely love drivers, but you have to have the trailer to be able to move what you're moving, whether that's a box truck or reefer, you have to have them. So they're just very fascinating. And it's one of those kind of, I guess, forgotten things in the industry. And it's really cool to meet someone else who like really loves trailers.
I'll just tell you a quick story about trailers, right? It's like, let's talk about UPS and talk about FedEx. So my background has always been in the maintenance of commercial trailers. So knowing how someone uses the trailer tells you a ton about their business. So FedEx Ground, they own trailers. They own converter dollies that connect the trailers. They don't own the power. They outsource that. They don't own the maintenance. They outsource that. They own the things that they absolutely have to own. Look at UPS. UPS owns the trailers, owns the trucks, owns the drivers, owns the mechanics, everything. And right now, we see at the next couple of weeks, disaster. If those organizations within UPS decide to stop everything, that's $100 billion a year business. That's massive. The scale of what they do is insane. But when you think about the trailer, it's how you use it that gives you the competitive advantage. You see brokerages out there today trying to build out trailer pools, shippers who might in other industries be called manufacturers or distributors or retailers. They call them shippers for us. They need trailers. So it tells you a lot. These are mobile warehouses. And that's why I love these things, because they are the only part of the supply chain that you cannot remove. Like, we're not going to build a tunnel system. We're not building like the post office or something. Just gives you a little thing. You're not going to get that. It's all the way that it is. So whatever innovation happens, the thing that doesn't change are those beautiful boxes. That's right. Absolutely.
It's cool because when I was in brokerage, and like I said, my broker at TQL, he did a lot of drop trailer. It was all like milk crate work. So we were picking up, doing round trip trailers from the manufacturers, dropping them at the dairy, and then doing empties back to the manufacturer to reload with empties. It was just a constant thing to bring them back. And it's always one of those, it's the biggest component, because like you said, you cannot take that away. They have to be there, because we're not going to be able to move freight anywhere else. We're not going to, move milk crates and move milk by drones.
That's exactly right. Exactly. That's what makes it like that. That gives us this staying power. So like, what I like to talk when we think about trailers in roadways days, right? So FedEx Ground it formerly used to be called RPS, Roadway Package System. So that was a division of Roadway in the long ago. But you'd have one piece of power to 7 or 8 trailers. Now you have 1 to maybe 2 or 3. So the technology changes, the ability to connect is making things more efficient. And my goodness, people gotta get excited about trailers. They're just so cool. They are so.
They are. They really are. They really are. Matt, I really appreciate your time. It was a really amazing conversation and able to just talk about freight, talk about the industry with you. I'm looking forward to having you on the ThinkFreight podcast again. If you guys don't follow Matt, check out the Armchair Attorney you're on LinkedIn. You said YouTube.
That's right.
Instagram and TikTok.
No, not right? Instagram. I have Twitter.
Not Instagram.
I'm not Twitter. Cool enough. Freight Caviar has done a great job on that world. And he's like, you should do that too. I'm like, I don't know about that. That's a lot of work.
No, they do a great job on Instagram. Instagram is such a tough platform to grow. So I give them all the props for such a huge audience over there. Matt, I really appreciate the time. Like I said, if you haven't checked out Matt, make sure you guys do. And we'll have him on again very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure's all mine, Matt. We'll talk soon. Have a good one.